the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense.
Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa, where the country is in a trade war with the United States. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau addressed this country today, but his response was also carried live in the United States as Trudeau's press conference was broadcast on all the major American news networks as he delivered this blunt message.
Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Dumb, says Trudeau, because it will drive up costs and kill jobs on both sides of the border, triggering a recession of choice and sparking inflation by design. Trump says it's all about fentanyl. Trudeau believes it's about something much larger.
He wants us to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us.
The retaliation has started. It's hammered global markets. Premiers are lining up to take action on everything from alcohol to energy.
We need to make sure America feels the pain.
Together, we'll ensure that Canada remains a true north, strong and free.
Canada did not ask for or initiate this. This is about one person, President Trump.
The man who started it all will have the world's attention tonight as Donald Trump delivers a State of the Union-style address to a joint session of Congress. The public response so far, a social media post threatening escalation. Please explain to Governor Trudeau of Canada that when he puts on a retaliatory tariff on the U.S., our reciprocal tariff will immediately increase by a like amount. There's a lot to get to. Power and Politics starts right now. Okay, let's get right to it. Mélanie Joly is the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Minister, welcome back to the show.
Hi,
it's good to
David.
see you.
Pleasure.
Have you heard or spoken to anyone in the U.S. administration since the tariffs came into force? Any conversations with the White House or cabinet level officials?
I had communications with Marco Rubio, but I haven't spoken to him yet. And my understanding is that that has been the case for, all of the Trump administration contacts we have. Now, we're not the only ones in that situation. Actually, the Mexicans are in the same situation. So none of them, neither have been contacted by the Trump administration while they launch a trade war against both of us.
Okay, so you've been in contact and communication with Marco Rubio, or are these of substance, or just checking in to set up a meeting? What can you tell us?
No, it's to set up a meeting, and I'm having a phone call with him at noon tomorrow.
Okay, so no further clarity on that. So we have seen some media from the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, he spoke with Fox Business News, I believe. I just want you to have a listen to this clip and get your reaction.
Both the Mexicans and the Canadians were on the phone with me all day today trying to show that they'll do better. And the president's listening because he's very, very fair and very reasonable. So I think he's going to work something out with them. It's not going to be a pause, none of that pause stuff. But I think he's going to figure out, you do more, and I'll meet you in the middle some way. And we're going to probably be announcing that tomorrow.
Do you have any idea what he's talking about there, meeting Canada in the middle by tomorrow?
Nope. And not only that, we've done the work on the border. Let's be frank here, okay? What President Trump is doing right now is using his own executive powers that stem from the fact that apparently there's a national security crisis at the border, which is clearly not the case. But let's say that we're working with him to make sure that we can solve it. So we came up with a border plan of $1.3 billion. We appointed a fentanyl czar. We made sure that we would be addressing the fentanyl problem. And of course, we're doing it also for us because we want to save Canadian lives. And we know that the U.S. is a net exporter of fentanyl and drugs and also illegal migrants to Canada. But basically, we were working in good faith. We were engaging. We were doing all the work. The Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of Immigration, on Friday met with the border czar of Trump in Washington. Many conversations, all positive about the work we were doing at the border. Now, when the President team and Howard Lutnick are coming up with new, different things that we should be looking at, it is not linked to the fact that he has only powers based on the fact that there is a national security crisis. If The president is not using these powers according to his own constitution. It's his own questions.
Right.
Now, what I'm saying here is that we didn't want to launch this trade war, but the U.S. did. And they cannot come every 30 days saying, oh, there may be a trade war, or maybe not, or yes. The goal of creating uncertainty is against our interests. And that's why there is an existential threat right now coming out of the U.S. on our own economy. So we will continue to retaliate with $155 billion worth of tariffs against American products. We will make sure that we work with premiers and of provinces across the country to address this issue. And at the same time, because I'm in charge of diplomacy, I'll try to find off-ramps to find a way to get out of this trade war. But fundamentally, they don't have our interests, which, we're the biggest trading partner, best ally, best neighbor. They don't have our interests really in good faith, not at all.
Well, the fentanyl seizures, and these are American statistics, are down 97% since the measures came in. And now Howard Lutnick was also saying, I believe it was Monday, that not enough deaths have declined. So, the executive order is about, seizures and enforcement, and now the rhetoric is about deaths. But on the rhetoric...
we think it's a bogus argument.
No, I understand. That's where I was going. Because the Prime Minister said today that Trump wants to ruin Canada's economy to make annexing
That's my
it
point.
easier. Do you really believe he wants to fully annex Canada?
I think the Prime Minister said today what we've been hearing in different conversations. It's just that Canadians had not heard it yet from their government and their leaders.
It was a remarkable comment to hear from a Prime Minister that
Yes,
he believes
but-
the U.S. truly wants to annex
But
Canada.
the idea is Canadians need to know. And once you accept that reality, which seems so far-fetched, so absurd, you actually act upon it. And there's hundreds of thousands of jobs that are at risk right now. There are lots of families and livelihoods across the country that are at risk. And our job is to make sure to defend our interests, defend our people. And clearly, this is difficult right now, to say the least, with the Trump administration. And when they're negotiating with us, they're not only addressing the issues of fentanyl and the border, they're putting everything on the table. They can be talking about military cooperation, they can be talking about the border, they can be talking about security partnerships, everything is on the table. And so now it's enough. It's enough. We will stand strong. We will be united. We know that we can be united. We can use our purchasing power against the Americans, because we are the biggest client, the biggest purchaser of goods and services from the Americans, more than China, France, the UK, and Japan combined. So Canadians have a say in this, and meanwhile, we will work with the American people themselves, because they're the only ones that can say to the Trump administration, that's enough. We're losing too much jobs in the US. That's enough. It's costing too much at the pump. That's enough. It's costing too much at the grocery store.
The Prime Minister opened his remarks by talking about the U.S. Attacking its closest friend while appeasing Vladimir Putin. Is that a rhetorical device just for comparison, or do you believe that Washington, under Trump, is pivoting to Moscow on a lot of its policy?
Have you seen Friday at the Oval Office?
Oh, I saw it. The world saw it. I'm just wondering what
that's
your
it.
position is.
Well, our position is, Ukraine right now is under existential threat, because, of course, they've been fighting for their own freedom for 3 years, but now they're fighting also for ours. We know that. Why? Because let's go back on facts. We know President Putin has no red lines. If we get a bad deal for Ukraine, he has the possibility to leave, rearm, and reinvade. And then once that's done, and they've been able to get Ukraine, they can go after Poland. They can go after other countries that are part of NATO. And we know that an attack on one is an attack on all. That's Article 5 of NATO. And so that's why when I say Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom and therefore fighting for ours, it is that very Article 5 of NATO that I have in mind. Now, meanwhile, why we can't get a bad deal on Ukraine is that China is looking at what's going on, and they're eyeing Taiwan. And so we're creating instability in the world with letting down Ukraine, letting down European security and therefore Europeans, letting down Canada, letting down Mexico, well, of course, U.S. is creating so much uncertainty, unpredictability, and chaos. It is against our own interests. So we have to make sure that we work with the American people to explain to them what is at stake. And so that's why I did American media, CNN. That's why also, of course, the Prime Minister was addressing to the American people themselves. And that's why we need to continue to talk to them and engage with them.
Look, we've got less than a minute left. It's remarkable that we're having a conversation like this about the United States, but this is where we are in 2025. The President is addressing a joint session of Congress tonight. It's not technically a State of the Union, but it's State of the Union-like. What are you worried you might hear? What do you hope to hear from Donald Trump this evening?
Well, I would like to have much more predictability, much more rationality, much more less chaos. That would be very helpful. But I think what I would like for all Canadians watching us right now and that have friends south of the border, that have family south of border, they need to tell them, we all need to tell to the American people, they need to talk to their lawmakers, they need to talk to their governors, their senators, their House representatives, to send a clear message that that's enough. And we need to make sure that we treat Canada as a sovereign and great country, great neighbor. And meanwhile, we need to make sure that the inflation doesn't go up and that jobs are protected. And if we're able to send that clear message to American people, we, I think, will be able to prevent this. But there's a lot of work to be done, David, to be frank.
Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly, thank you for your time on a busy day.
Thank you.
Well, Canada and the U.S. are now engaged in an all-out trade war. President Donald Trump has imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian exports, 10% tariffs on Canadian oil and energy. Own 25% tariff. First on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods immediately. That includes products like orange juice, wine and beer, motorcycles, appliances, clothing, and footwear. A second phase will roll out 21 days later on another $125 billion in goods. That will give Canadian businesses time to plan and adjust. It includes some bigger ticket items like vehicles, boats, steel and aluminum, aerospace products, as well as beef, pork, and dairy. Canada's premiers are expressing both concern and anger over President Trump's tariffs now that they are officially in effect. Just have a listen to this.
Donald Trump is a short-sighted man who yields his power just for the sake of it, not having any consideration for the destructive impact of his decisions on both Canadians and on Americans as well.
These tariffs are an attack on Canada and on who we are, and they mark a turning point for our province and our country.
We didn't ask for this fight that the President has brought to Canada and to British Columbia, but I'll tell you this, we're not going to shrink from it.
What a disaster that is. He attacks his closest friends and neighbors, stood shoulder to shoulder with them in wars and other crises. And who does he cozy up to? But Putin. You got to be kidding me.
The premiers met today virtually with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to hash out next steps. And we're joined now by Andrew Furey, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Premier, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, David. How are you?
I'm good, sir. You've said in the past, you compared the energy assets of Canada as a queen in the game of chess, that you don't expose it too early by moving it into the board. We've heard Doug Ford talk about using that queen. We heard Francois Legault talk about it today. Where are you as an oil-producing, hydro-producing province on this?
Certainly, I think that seeing the tariffs come into effect certainly elevates the use of the queen. I think we still have to be measured in our response and balanced in our response and strategic, therefore, in our response. And I have heard some comments about how to use the energy piece, but this is where it requires a Team Canada approach. If we're going to cause the most distress and the most pain to American consumers and Americans more broadly, we need to make sure that it is the right balance of being responsive but not necessarily being escalating. And while I do support, and I know not every premier supports, instruments like export tariffs in the short term to try to bring resolution to this acute issue, I am a bit concerned about some other uses of energy at this particular moment in time.
You think it's too early to fire that shot, so to speak, metaphorically, because it's a tariff war, not a war?
No, of course, but I am concerned that escalating too fast with energy in particular leaves Canada very little room to navigate into the future, and this president will be around for 4 years. We all want an immediate resolution of this issue, but the reality is that he's an erratic, irrational actor who believes in misguided economic theory that is going to continue to try to extract value from Canada. One, by the way, that I believe is based on an imperialistic, expansive agenda, and using economic issues, economic pain, economic chaos to try to extract that value. So we have to be very careful and strategic, measured, but responsive and firm and courageous in our approach in defending Canada and taking nothing off the table, but not playing it all at once.
Okay, so Howard Lutnick was on Fox News today, and it's our information. He's been speaking with Dominic LeBlanc, the finance minister, throughout the day, which would make sense, the Commerce Secretary and the finance minister. And he said, look, I've been on the phone with them all day. This is Howard Lutnick, and we think we might be able to meet Canada and Mexico in the middle, and we might have something to announce on that tomorrow. I have no clear idea what that means. How do you interpret those comments from the Commerce Secretary that we might see a rolling back or a reduction or something in 24 hours?
You're asking me to interpret what what an inner sphere of the President of the United States language means?
It's the time we're in, Premier, you know?
Well, as I said before, I don't have that code. I didn't do enough psychiatry in medical school to figure out the motives nor the language of decision makers in that sphere right now. I do think that they're feeling pressure from American industry. I do think they're feeling pressure from American consumers. I do think they're feeling pressure from families in the United States who are experiencing cost of living pressures. And I think that they will try to use language to rationalize in their own heads the inevitable diplomatic resolution that needs to occur in order to cause these two economies to grow together, to provide for families and growing industries and reunite the biggest trading relationship and what should be an example and a beacon of hope for everyone else in the world.
So just as a final point, Premier, I know there was a conversation with the Prime Minister and other officials today, including Minister LeBlanc, about supports for people affected by this. We've talked in the past a knock-on effect in the fishing industry, the oil sector, in your provincial economy. It's tax deferrals, waiting periods on EI. I mean, what's your sense of how robust and significant the federal response is at this point?
Well, I was happy with the response to date from the federal government, including, by the way, that there's contemplation for the unknown. So there was the immediate, obvious instruments that already exist, BDC, EDC, EI, as you just suggested. But there's also contemplation that there could be further instruments, depending on how long this goes on.
Do they need the House of Commons for that, Premier? What's your sense? Can they do it through regulation? Because the political situation is messy federally.
Yeah, of course it is. But the executive is given significant authority to be able to handle times of emergency, which may or may not need approval through the House of Commons. The executive is afforded significant powers, especially when it comes to this situation, an emergency situation that threatens not just the economy of Canada, but the sovereignty of Canada.
Okay, so as a final point, you think there's enough to get us through this as a country without the House of Commons being recalled, or do you see in the next month, 2 months, they might need to get back to Parliament, depending on how it goes?
Look, David, I think this is going to go on for 4 years. So eventually the House of Commons is going to have to sit.
Sure.
But in the acute phase, I think that the constitutional instruments exist through the executive to be able to deal with this. What is more important, and the message I want to leave with Canadians, is that there was a unified front amongst premiers in the recognition that appeasement and capitulation is not going to work, and that we need to be strong in defending the Canadian values. Because make no mistake, he's conflated issues before, he's conflating issues now, he's trying to cause economic chaos in order to expand the United States. That sounds chilling to say out loud, but the sooner that Canadians realize what he says is what he means and take it seriously and embrace for any potential impact and defend against any potential impact, the better we will all be.
Okay, just on that, and very quickly, Premier, because I got a congressman from California standing by and I want to get to him. The Prime Minister said that today, and it's the first time we've sort of seen him really say it, that he believes this is really about annexation. I mean, you agree with that. We've kind of danced around it as being a possibility, but do you truly believe it is Donald Trump's goal to absorb Canada?
David, I've said from day one on this, when people were dismissing his tweet as jokes, a veil of, I always thought it was a thin veneer of humor that was really disguising what he actually had as an agenda. He's a president who has no check and balance within the Constitution of the United States. He's already shown contempt for the courts. He owns the executive. He owns the legislature. And he has the untethered future because he's not accountable to the electorate, potentially.
Right.
So this is a man who is in pursuit of a legacy, which I believe is one based on an imperialistic agenda, one that also wants a firm reset of the world order. I mean, we saw that play out with the president of Ukraine. And I think anyone who doesn't take him at his word, which was the message delivered to the premiers, by the way, in Washington, D.C., there was some confusion by the officials. They were like, we don't understand why you're confused. He's telling you what he wants to do. Take him at his word. In Canada, we've always thought that he was joking. We need to understand that he is not joking. He means what he says, and he's going to try to achieve what he says. And so this is going to require incredible resolve beyond the next 30 days or whenever there's the next general election. This is going to require the courage, resolve, and strength and pride of Canadians, which I know is there, which you know is there, which has been galvanized because of this particular pursuit, to meet the moment. And I believe that Canadians will meet this moment of national pride, unity, and strength.
Okay, Premier, we're going to have to leave it there because I got to get to the Congressman. I want to thank you so much. That's Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey. Well, Ontario Premier Doug Ford is threatening to tax the electricity that his province sends to the United States or to stop the flow of that power altogether. And Quebec Premier François Legault says he's open to the same measures.
I had the chance to discuss this possibility with Doug Ford, and we'll continue discussing and looking at all kinds of scenarios, but it's the start of the commercial war.
I'm highly recommending to President Trump, don't force our hand. You underestimate Canadians, you're making a massive mistake. We're resilient, we're proud, and we're strong. And we will survive, and we will continue to thrive.
New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt joins me now. Premier Holt, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, David.
We got a pretty clear sense from the federal government how they're going to retaliate against the United States. What's less clear since the Prime Minister spoke is what they're specifically going to do to support workers and companies affected by this. Did you get any clarity or reassurances from the Prime Minister in your meeting?
We did get a bit more clarity from the Prime Minister and from Minister LeBlanc because the supports are mostly coming out of the Department of Finance. There was talk of tax deferrals to support working capital and changes to EI, both the work sharing program and the waiting period to help workers. So we're always looking for more details and looking for more. New Brunswick today announced a robust 4-pillar plan on how we're going to support workers and provide relief for businesses while we continue to really tackle internal trade barriers and promote New Brunswick-made products. And we detailed $162 million of support to workers and businesses in New Brunswick. So we'd love to see the next level of detail from the feds.
Okay, so the tax deferrals they're talking about and changes to EI for job sharing and waiting periods. As you understand it, are these things they can do through regulation or do they need to bring back the House of Commons?
The Prime Minister said explicitly that these are things that can go ahead through the regular business and that they don't need to recall the House of Commons to ensure these are in place for Canadians.
Okay, so are you confident that there's enough there with the legislature on pause, and prorogued to get workers through this? I mean, obviously, if this goes on for a year or 2 years, it's a whole different conversation. But, at least for the short to medium term, what is your sense? Do you think there's enough there without legislative changes?
Yeah, well, we don't know what the there is because it wasn't quantified. So tax deferrals, to what extent, to what magnitude, right? We in New Brunswick have a $50 million fund that will support businesses up to $5 million each on working capital. I'd love to see that same level of detail from the federal government. So what kind of working capital support are they going to provide, and who will be eligible, and how quickly can they turn that around?
You've had a lot of these meetings lately, but this is the first one since we've officially been in a trade war with the United States. I mean, how would you characterize this moment and the feeling in that meeting amongst the first ministers?
I think that there is a real sense of resolve amongst the first ministers that we knew this was possibly going to come. We're mad as hell, and we are going to fight for our country. And we know that Canada is a country rich in resources with talented, solution-oriented, resilient people. And we're going to get through this. And it's really, really frustrating that we have to get through this with pain for the American people and the Canadian people because of the unjustified and illegal actions of the president.
How worried are you right now? I don't know if New Brunswick is as trade exposed as, say, Alberta would be, right, because of energy exports, but smaller province with a smaller economy. So you feel every shock, no matter how big it is. Just how worried are you right now, Premier?
Well, New Brunswick is more trade exposed, right? 92% of our exports go to the U.S. So this is exceptionally significant for us. More than 10% of the jobs in our economy are connected to the U.S. And will be impacted by these tariffs. And so the potential in layoffs is significant. The potential decrease in economic activity is significant, which is why we responded today with a clear action plan, how we're stopping the procurement of U.S. goods. We will not be purchasing U.S. items. The U.S. booze is coming off the shelves. There's things that we can do while we offer supports to our businesses and workers to help them get competitive and productive and diversify their markets. And while we move aggressively on internal trade barriers. So New Brunswick's already put up 50% of our exemptions in the Canadian Free Trade Act. We want to see other provinces get those cabinet decisions made to move that file forward. The same with labor mobility. We announced today that we're moving forward with mutual recognition of certificates and credentials from across the country. Anyone who has a Canadian credential will see it accepted here in New Brunswick. We're going to push that through right away, and we're looking forward for our provinces to do the same, because this is going to hurt, and we have to pull out all the stops. We have to do everything we can and demonstrate to the U.S. that we're not going to be bullied, that we're good neighbors, but we also have lots of friends and allies around the world. And so while I am afraid in terms of what this will do to hurt New Brunswickers and New Brunswick businesses, I know that we are fighters and we are resilient, and that there are more connections and opportunities across our country and abroad for us, and we'll get through it.
You said earlier you wanted to see a little bit more clarity from the federal government, that reassurances that what they're going to do, they can do without legislative approval. Pierre Poilievre suggested today that any revenue collected from tariffs would be used for a tax cut, and only a small amount that he says set aside to help directly affected workers and businesses. What's your preference here? Do you think a tax cut is the right response to this right now, or is it direct aid from government as the Liberals seem to be suggesting?
Well, the conversation that we've had around the COF and the First Minister's table is that funds collected through tariffs should ideally work their way back to the people who paid them. So sometimes the people who paid them are the consumers who bore the higher price, and sometimes the people who are paying them are the businesses that had to bring in those goods as their inputs to make their product. So I don't think it can be completely black and white. But we need to make sure that it's the businesses that are paying first, and it's their workers that will pay first. And so the folks who are impacted by the tariffs, who are seeing job loss, shift loss, and revenue loss, need to be supported. It's those workers we want to make sure have options and have support so we can get through this hopefully short period of time with tariffs.
So is that direct aid in your view, Premier, just as a final point, or do you think sort of a more global thing like a tax cut to help everybody dealing with this is the way to go, or is it a balance?
I think we need a balanced approach. I think there's a lot of different tools, because the way the pain is felt will be different. So how you help a worker in this sector versus an entrepreneur and the impacts to their business, those are going to be two different tools.
Right. New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt, thanks for joining us on a busy day. I suspect we'll be speaking again. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, David.